So today I'd like to run a few live performance benchmarks which will show you the differences between the performance of a BOXX APEXX 4 system and an Apple Mac Pro, specifically in regard to creative professional workflows in some of the key applications. For example, Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, and we'll also run a Cinebench benchmark. After we run the benchmarks, we'll talk to Park Gregg, a professional colorist, and get his reactions. There is a standard test that a lot of folks use for Photoshop. It's a blur test. And so I've got that just to show, regardless of how much motion graphics or video you're doing, inevitably you spend a good amount of time doing Photoshop work as well in the real world. So for a lot of people, this may not be the sexiest test, but it does do a good job of showing a practical effect. So I've got an action here that's a radial blur, and I'm going to just hit these on 3, and you can kind of see the difference in the speed of processing the blur. So 1, 2, 3. So on the Mac, you actually see a progress bar, but what's happening is on the left, the BOXX system literally didn't even need to pop up a progress bar. Oh, wow. So the difference here was 10.2 seconds versus 5.9 seconds. And obviously, you're doing a lot of blurs. When you're working in Photoshop, you're doing a lot of Gaussian blurs, a lot of different types of blurs. So it just gives you an idea of how fast it can process. So for the DaVinci Resolve 14 test, we used the free version of DaVinci Resolve, which is fully functional and gives us all the formats up to 4K. So for that test, we ran the standard candle benchmark. And that benchmark consists of 4 levels of blur nodes, all the way up to 66 blur nodes. On the BOXX system, we saw that all of the levels, the first 3 levels, ran at the full frame rate, and only the 66 node would not run at the full. I believe it ran at about 13 frames per second. And on the Mac system, the first level of 9 blur nodes ran at 24 frames a second, but all of the subsequent blur node levels ran below the full frame rate. And I believe at the 66 we saw a 3 frame per second. For this, you start with the 9 blur nodes. Let me load up that clip. Thank you. And load up my 9 blur nodes. There we go. So we're going to watch and see how these systems behave when you play back that level of blur mode. So you can see on the left, this is running the 24 frames per second, and as well as this, I did notice that the Mac took a little longer to get your green indicator, meaning that it was locked in, not dropping frames at 24 frames per second, but both systems can handle the 9 blur node tests. So let's load up our 18 blur nodes. My left hand is not very dexterous. All right. And we'll see on our BOXX system, plays at 24. And our Mac system now in this test, you're supposed to take, if you're getting 2 frame rates, you're supposed to take the lower. So that would be 12.
Sure.
So 12 out of 24, and that's at 18 blur nodes. So we'll continue on with the test.
And what resolution is this footage?
This is actually HD footage.
Okay.
It's just that you've got, when you start playing 18 blur nodes, it does require a lot of GPU.
Yeah, you can't underestimate blurs. You think of it as a simple effect, but it's one of the most processor intensive, for sure.
And it's when they designed this test, that's exactly why they chose blur nodes. There's also, you can also run this test with noise reduction. There's 4 levels of noise reduction that they measure. But to run that test, you need that is a feature that's available in Studio. So I'm not going to run that particular test today. You'll notice if you look at results online, the results for the blur and the neutral density tend to be around the same. So this is 33. So on the BOXX system, you can see it gets up to 24. Now what's interesting is it's a red dot, which means that it might drop some frames. So this is starting to push even that system's GPU, but you are getting 24. And then on the Mac, we're getting between 7 and 8, so that result would be a 7. All right. So now the last level is the 66, and this is meant to basically, realistically, there are not many systems that should be able to handle 66 levels and play that in real time. If you're able to do that, then you can pretty much afford any system you need. Right. So let's see, on the BOXX system, with these twin NVIDIA cards, it looks like it is running between 10 and 11, so that would be a 10. Although it is consistently running the 11 through. And then on the Mac system, we're between 3 and 4. And so this is where, you know, you get into the real life, when you're really taxing your system, what are you going to be able to play your real-time video at? And this is a good performance test that demonstrates the performance gap. I mean, really, even with this HD footage, we weren't able to get past the initial 9 blur modes. Once we played the 9 blur modes, after that, the 18, the Mac wasn't able to keep up.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and granted, you're probably not going to be doing too many effects with that many blurs on it.
Yeah.
But you know, when you have a room full of clients and they're expecting real-time performance, like it makes a big difference when you can achieve that and when you can't.
So just using the latest Cinebench benchmark software, I'm just going to run the OpenGL test here. See if I can, on 3, 1, 2, 3. So even the time of loading, I didn't even expect that, but I did hit them simultaneously, and the BOXX is already off to a head start. Now, what this particular test is going to really highlight is just the advantage you have being able to load more powerful graphics cards. You know, obviously with the current Mac Pro design, you're very limited in what you can get, and unfortunately it's got Thunderbolt 2, not Thunderbolt 3 in it, so there's very little GPU acceleration you could get because Thunderbolt 2 won't allow GPU acceleration. And in our end result, we see, you know, nearly twice as fast on the frames per second. So let's run the CPU test. Get ready, 1, 2, 3. And here again, we have the advantage of we're actually running the Core i9 processor over on the BOXX system. output obviously.
And the Mac
has a-
is running a Xeon E5?
Yes, at 3 gigahertz. So BOXX also, one of the specialties of BOXX is they overclock. So your major manufacturers, Dell and HP, they won't overclock their processors.
Right.
But BOXX is all about getting, since the core market for BOXX, the exclusive market for BOXX is creative professionals. I'm throwing the scientific community in there as well, but with the focus that BOXX has, it behooves their customer base that they overclock their systems. So,
Yeah, it seems like that's a huge advantage because I once dabbled in overclocking and I quickly left that area.
yeah, right.
Like if you can get it from the shop that way, that's pretty nice.
Well, and another huge advantage since BOXX has such a focused user base of creative professionals, they can offer incredible support because they know all these applications and they're very familiar with these applications and how they run on their hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you call into support, you're not getting, it's not like calling into HP or Dell where you are represent 2% of the, of their market.
Right.
You are representing 99% of their market, and you're getting people who know exactly how these different software are supposed to run on their systems.
Yeah. Well, just looking at this, like a lot of people, always associate OpenGL with gaming or real-time 3D rendering, and but of course it goes well beyond that. Like in my world of color grading, all the real-time color grading effects are being processed in OpenGL, and so where these were 3D rendering frame rates, that usually directly applies to what number and how much of a real-time effect or color grade you can be doing on your footage, and so that's a good analysis of kind of what you'd be seeing in production software as well.
So I've imported some 6K red footage into Adobe Premiere, and for this particular test I have set my video and rendering playback to software only so that we can look at the CPU power on the BOXX system. I've got my various quality settings in the timeline, and for example, if I want to do it at play it back at a fourth, we can see that the drop frame indicator is showing us green, which means there are no drop frames. And now we'll do it at a half. And now just to push the limits, we'll do it at full resolution. And now you can see we're getting some drop frames. Now it's played the clip, let's see how many we got. So we had 263 drop frames. Now let's switch it to the CUDA acceleration. Delete our previews. We'll switch it back to a fourth. Interestingly, we can see that with CUDA acceleration in this particular footage, we aren't even getting our full frame rate at a fourth resolution. And we can expect to do even worse at a half. And your performance will vary depending on your codec and what its requirements are. So let's try our same test with this RAID footage on the Mac. We're going to go to our project settings and we're going to check. We're in the software only, and we're at a 4th resolution. And we can see that it plays the 4th resolution without drop frames. Let's try half resolution. And you can see that your drop frame indicator is on, and when the clip is finished, we'll take a look at how many frames it dropped in half resolution. So there were 150 frames dropped. And of course, if we tried to go up to full, in software only, neither of our systems are able to do that, and the Mac looks like it's only rendering about 4 frames. And that just demonstrates the difference between the CPU power in these two systems. Now let's look at our OpenCL performance. So we can see the OpenCL hardware acceleration plays the quarter resolution smoothly. And it has trouble on the half resolution. About 99 frames dropped. Of course, we could do that just with the CPU over on the BOXX system. And just for kicks, we'll try full resolution. Now, the hardware acceleration is doing much better on the full resolution than it did with software only on the Mac, where it only managed to render a couple of frames. In this case, it dropped 193 frames. So let's see a comparison side by side. I've got my BOXX APEXX 4 set up to software only on this red clip. And over on the Mac, I'm going to give it the OpenCL acceleration. So this is CPU versus GPU on these two systems. Oh gosh, they both dropped frames at the same time. And that one dropped 136 frames, and that one only dropped 21 frames. Now let's look at exporting footage from Premiere. We have the same red clip that we were working with before. And on the left-hand side, I've got my BOXX APEXX 4, which will be using NVIDIA CUDA acceleration. And on the right is the Mac Pro, which will be using OpenCL. Now I can start this exporting at the same time, and we can see the differences, even on a short clip, that the dual card CUDA acceleration has. So even on a clip of such short duration, you can see that there's a substantial difference in the export performance. And really this just shows that for read and write, all of our formats that we could be using.
Yeah.
All the way up, yeah.
your storage throughput is so critical, and I take it showing that basically you're removing that equation because
Correct.
the speed is incredible, and so that's not a factor in these tests.
And as you mentioned, it's all about real-time playback on these systems. When you have video footage, you need to be able to play it back as people are going to be able to view it. So as long as you can, what these disk speeds show, tests show is that we can practically play back both read and write files at these frame rates in all these different formats. The green indicates if there were any that we couldn't, they'd appear in red. And generally speaking, when you're getting 1300 on both the read and write, you're doing good. And that's the product of the SSDs inside there. Now, just while you'd expect us to have the same over here, this is also an SSD, and I'm in the same folder here. So I'm just going to show that we do have the advantage of a faster SSD, which this is a standard SSD configuration that you can get with the BOXX system.
Is this rated, or is this just a single drive?
That's a good question. So I have to ask and see what they've got in here. I think that they've just got a single SSD in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's reading almost 2 gigabytes a second.
Yeah. So it's really good performance.
Yeah.
The difference, while this is an advantage, of course, if you're just playing back footage and both systems can play it back at the same rate, it wouldn't make any difference in the benchmark.
Right.
On, either way you're viewing footage that's playing back in real time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really interfere with the benchmarks we're running, but I think it is a great thing to note that out of the box, you're getting a faster disk speed as well.
Right.
Many people ask me about the real-world performance differences between the BOXX APEXX 4 and the Mac Pro. I hope that these benchmarks will help you make the best selection of your next professional workstation. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact BOXX directly or visit their website.